Gentlemen, welcome to the video and welcome to the channel if it's your first time here. Today we're going to be talking about my archery setup for the 2024 to 2025 archery season here in Ohio and across a few other states. We're going to get into the specs and accessories on my bow as well as all of my arrows and talk to you about why I've chosen each component for each piece of my kit. Now my archery equipment hasn't changed much in the past few years. I've kind of found a sweet spot that I'm really happy in, and I've put a few years of use onto pretty much every piece of equipment you're going to see here. So I do have a historical basis to speak on for all of these accessories and components that I've used to build my kit. So hopefully you guys can take a little bit of information that I present in this video and maybe apply it to your archery setups for whatever type of hunting that you're doing. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, the first thing we're going to talk about is the bow. Ooh, corny editing, very nice. All right, let's go ahead and get started here and talk about the bow that I'm going to be hunting with this season. So this is the Hoyt Torrex XT. There's a whole video on the channel already talking about the specs behind the Torrex, why I selected it, and the reasons that you're seeing it in this video. If you are interested in watching that video, I will leave it linked in the cards right now. Now be warned, that is not the newest video on the channel. We've come a long way as far as filming and editing, so the quality is going to be a little bit lower, but everything in it does stand the test of time, and I still pretty much agree with everything I said in that video about the Torrex XT. So this bow is essentially a budget entry from Hoyt, right? The Hoyt Torrex XT comes in at around $800, I think. I'll have to check the website to double check, but that is quite a lot cheaper than a lot of flagships that we're seeing on the market today, and that's what made me interested in it from the get-go. As far as performance, it's right up there with a lot of flagship bows, maybe losing a few feet per second ATA, but other than that, the feel, fit, and finish of it is still very, very Hoyt in nature. This bow draws very, very naturally and very smoothly. As I move through the draw cycle in this bow, there's not very many gigantic humps or valleys in the draw cycle. So generally speaking, whenever I draw this bow, I don't have to necessarily pull it over a big hump where the draw weight becomes heaviest. It essentially just floats through it, and then the let-off carries it through the rest of the draw cycle, and I'm left with a very nice back wall. It's not a rock-solid back wall that I'm going to be more likely to bounce off of. I did feel that on some other flagship models of compound bows from multiple different companies, and I didn't love it. I also don't like a spongy back wall because that has a lot of negative sides that go along with it too. So being able to get something that's right in the middle, still leaning towards a stiff back wall like the Torrex XT has been great for me. I'm able to sit on that back wall for a long time and not worry about the bow trying to rip itself back forward out of my hand, and it allows me to sit at full draw for a lot longer, a lot more comfortably as well. All in all, this bow has been a freaking workhorse. It's been very easy to tune, it's been very forgiving in my shooting experiences, and I've pretty much never had an issue with it other than a little bit of the finish flaking off. This bow is actually black from the factory. I did take the liberty of Alumahide painting it in an OD green, which actually emulates the Wilderness green from Hoyt pretty darn well. I'm very happy with how that paint job turned out. But I essentially just did that because the actual finish that was on the aluminum of the riser was trying to wear off from me dragging it through briar bushes and up trees and bumping it off of stuff. So it was mostly just to reseal the finish on the bow and give it a little bit more longevity. So arguably the most important accessory that you're going to put onto a bow is going to be your sight. Now, this being sort of a meat and potatoes type build, I didn't want to go with something that was overly complex or complicated, but I also kind of have a sweet spot for sliders and single pins, or in this case, double pins. So this is the Spot Hogg Fast Eddie 2-pin. So it's a 2-dot vertical pin with a dial-up sight on the side. So what this allows me to do is calculate out a sight tape and basically be able to shoot this bow out to 90 or even 100 yards fairly comfortably for practice without my fletchings impacting into my sight housing. What this allows me to do is practice at extended ranges, which makes 30, 40-yard shots in the woods pretty much chip shots once you're used to shooting out to 60 plus. And I really like that way of training. Again, I train at ranges that I would pretty much never fire at an animal from, and that allows me to get much, much better at firing at ranges inside of my ethical range, which is about 40 yards. An investment in high quality and high durability optics is something that I try to preach across rifles and archery equipment, and in this case it's no different. So the way this one works essentially is I can set my dials so that my top pin is 20 yards and that sets my bottom pin at about 35. At 30, I'll hold a little bit low with the bottom pin, and at 40, I'll hold a little bit high with the bottom pin. That gives me the same advantage of a fixed pin sight out to 40 yards where I don't have to reach up and adjust anything on my sight, but this does allow me to extend that range out to whatever yardage I want to dial inside of 100 yards. All right, once you've selected a sight, the next part of your kit that you're going to need to choose is an arrow rest. Now again, extremely important, this is what your arrow is going to slide through, or across in this case, as your bow is firing, and it's going to be pretty much the king of your tuning on your bow as well. Moving that rest left, right, up, and down in order to tune for paper tuning is extremely important, so I like to use something with some good adjustability. In this case, I went with the QAD HDX drop-away rest, and I have put some of my own stealth tape on it just because I'm not a huge fan of the silencing kits that come with them. They tend to wear off and leave some glue residue behind. I've also gone ahead and stealth taped the shelf on my bow as well, so that when that rest drops away, like so, it makes less noise. So I'm kind of dampening my noise there on my shots, which is always a plus. This is a cable-driven rest. As you can see here, this is tied into my cable on my bow, not my limbs. People will argue day and night about the reliability of a cable-driven versus limb-driven system. I don't necessarily disagree with either party. I think that there is potential for a cable-driven system to be less reliable than a limb-driven one. I just haven't made the switch. I haven't really felt the need to, and I'm super happy with how the HDX is performing. So next we're going to talk about stabilizers. Now this is a Trophy Ridge Hitman stabilizer, I think the 10-inch, on a 10-degree shrewd offset. So as you can see, my stabilizer drops down like so. Come on, focus up. It has some drop to it and drops down lower like this. What that does is essentially drops the center of gravity of my bow lower, which means that in my hand it decreases the amount of pin float and even slows it down in my case. I can't necessarily say what it's going to do for you if you add offset to your stabilizer, make it longer, add a back bar, any of those things. If you really want to experiment with this stuff, it's more of like something you do in your backyard continuously until you find something you like, than something you go ask YouTube about and have somebody else tell you what stabilizer configuration is right for you. I don't know what's right for you. I don't know how you handle your bow. I don't know what bow you're shooting. I don't know anything about your personal setup, so it's hard for me to say what stabilizer setup would work well for you. Big fan of the Hitman stabilizers, especially as sort of a budget-oriented stabilizer. They get the weight pretty far out front, and I've got both of the weight discs attached, as you can see here and here. So we are running max weight fairly far out from the bow and at a 10-degree drop. All right, final piece of kit for your bow that's pretty darn vital is a good quiver. Now, as you can see here, I'm using a tight spot quiver. Again, fairly expensive, but I can move this back and forth to different bows in the future. This is only a 3-arrow quiver. The way it attaches is with this little cam lever here on the side. You flip this out, and it opens up the jaws on the side right there. And then those coincide with a bracket that is attached to your sight just here. So you pop those jaws over the bracket, push it in to your preferred offset from your bow. You can adjust the distance from your bow and make it a real tight, low-profile package here. And then you cam that down and it locks it in place. Again, 3-arrow quiver. You might be able to find a reason to carry 4, 5, 6, 7 arrows into the field with you. If you're in one of those states where you can hunt something like grouse or some sort of small game with your bow while you're out in the field, and you're going to be out in the field for a long period of time, 3 is probably not enough. You're going to want to go to something like at least a 5. But for me, running sort of minimalist equipment here, I like the 3-arrow quiver from Tight Spot very much. And I also love this attachment method. Sometimes in the tree, I will pop off my quiver and I will leave my bow on the left side of the tree because it's lower profile and stays closer to the tree, and I'll put my quiver off to the right. If I were to take a shot with this bow and need to reload, my right hand is open because I've just fired a shot, and the quiver is waiting on the right side of the tree for me to grab another arrow, knock it up, and maybe take another follow-up shot if I have to. As far as quivers go, lots of options out there. I like Tight Spot. They are not cheap, but from my experience, they've been highly durable, and I'm a big fan of the way that it holds broadheads up inside of the head housing, so I can wholeheartedly recommend them as a good investment on this bow and any future bow I might grab. We're going to get into arrows in just a second now, but if you made it to this video, that means that you're either subscribed or you found me in your feed. Either way, thanks for clicking on the video and spending a little time learning about my bow setup. The channel is growing at a decent rate that I'm pretty happy with, and because of that, I'm asking that if you enjoy the content that you're finding here on the channel, please consider subscribing right down below. It's perfectly free, helps me out a lot, and it lets me know that you guys like the stuff that I'm putting out here on the channel and kind of lets me know what to make more of and what to make less of. So, with that being said, again, thank you for watching, and let's move on to arrows. So this is my entire hunting arrow fully built out exactly how I'm going to be carrying it in the woods. We'll just go nock to point and talk about my components and why I've chosen them. So right here at the back is a nocturnal lighted nock. I just made a video about whether or not lighted nocks are worth it. In my opinion, yeah, they are, but there are some cons that you might want to be aware of too. If you're interested in that, I'll leave it linked right up here in the cards. But I use them essentially to spot hits, which changes the way that I'll track my animal, and any free information that I can get, either from the blood on my fletchings or from visually seeing the arrow impact, I'm going to take, because that stuff is extremely valuable. And basically lets me know how to treat a deer after I've made a successful shot, basically whether or not I need to give it a half hour or a half a day. They also look sweet as hell. So moving down the shaft here, we're going to talk about the fletchings. So max stealth vanes, nothing new to the industry, very, very popular, and for good reason. I got these ones fletched with a 3-degree helical. Hopefully you can kind of see that orientation here. And they do a wonderful job at steering broadheads. They're actually quite quiet as well. There's a few other things about this arrow design that make it quiet that we'll get into in just a second, but I have noticed versus something like a 2-inch blazer vane or something with a higher profile, these are quite a bit quieter, which I think that when people talk about an animal jumping the string, I think they're actually jumping the sound of the vanes in the arrow along with the sound of the bow going off. My bow is extremely quiet, which is another thing I love about that Torrex, especially for the money, extremely quiet. Shooting it next to other people is actually kind of off-putting because I'm like, why is your bow screaming? And they're like, what are you talking about? So, triple fletch AAE max stealths with a 3-degree helical. Love that design, and I also pretty much always recommend a helical fletch. There's basically no downsides to it, and there's definitely no upsides to a straight fletch. So going with helical is basically a no-brainer for me. Let's move on to the arrow shaft. This is an Easton Axis 5mm shaft in 300 spine. Now I'm shooting about a 28¼ inch draw length and 70 pounds on my bow, so a 300 spine is actually technically incorrect according to the Easton's chart, but I've gone ahead and added a 100 grain Ethics Archery insert up front and a 100 grain broadhead, so that requires a bit stiffer of a spine on the arrow shaft itself to get your bow into tune. I go with match grade quality control on these as well, the .001 deflection rating. The wall thickness on the Easton Axis, especially in the stiffer spines, is very thick, and that lends itself very well to durability, and that's why I went with the Axis arrows from Easton. Also, 5mm arrows versus your standard 6.5mm arrow are going to have less wind deflection and less resistance moving through, let's call it material that we're hunting, and should get you better penetration and less wind deflection. Moving up front here, we have an Ethics Archery 100 grain insert, and this is actually one of their half-out inserts. This has a little stainless steel stem that goes back into the arrow shaft, which is where most of the weight is housed. Very durable and have had very, very good lockup inside of my arrow shafts. I essentially did this just for FOC, and that's why I moved to a heavier arrow. The actual FOC of these arrows is about 16% as built, and I've added a 100 grain Black Hornet. Now you might say, why did you go with a 100 grain broadhead? You kind of limited yourself on overall arrow weight and FOC there. The honest answer is, I bought a ton of 100 grain Black Hornet broadheads, and I already had them, and I didn't want to get rid of them to go buy some 125s or 150s or change broadheads in general. So I stuck with 100 grain field points as well as 100 grain broadheads because they're extremely common, which makes them easier to find in big box stores and stuff like that. So the Black Hornet itself is probably my favorite fixed blade broadhead. I don't mean to keep shouting out other videos of mine, but I'm going to do it one more time. I have an entire video on the topic of fixed versus mechanical broadheads. I essentially don't shoot mechanicals. There's nothing wrong with shooting mechanicals as long as you know your limitations. But this is the fixed blade that I select 99% of the time. It's a 2-blade design with 2 bleeder blades off the back. You always want back set bleeders. You do not want your bleeders to be starting up at the top of the arrow point because that's going to allow the arrow to start penetration before those bleeder blades contact the hide and add more resistance. So it's able to cut that initial wound channel before those bleeders start, and the initial wound channel is more similar to a 2-blade cut, which is going to give you more penetration and less resistance. These things come razor sharp out of the package. I run them over a strop with a little bit of buffing compound to make them freaky sharp. And they also have replaceable blades in their design, so if you break something or if you just need a replaceable blade designed for whatever reason, you can order the blades separate. Just a little Phillips head screw here on the top. So overall, this arrow comes out to about 550 grains, 16% FOC, and flies like a freaking dart out of my bow. I've got really, really, really good arrow flight with broadheads essentially grouping right next to my field points out to extended ranges. And tune is extremely important for hunting. You have to have straight arrow flight, which is something that using high-vis vanes or a lighted knock on the back can kind of teach you about. You should be able to see very little, if any, lateral movement in your vanes or your lighted knock coming out of your bow to tell you that you're having good arrow flight. Obviously, paper tuning helps this, but we don't necessarily paper tune with broadhead. I'm going to be hunting whitetails, black bears, and maybe even turkeys with this setup in the future. And I love it. So, generally curious about your arrow setup and bow setup for this deer season, let me know down in the comments. I will be responding to pretty much every relevant comment down there, as I like to do, to keep it sort of a discussion format. So other than that, guys, thank you so much for watching the video, and please consider subscribing to the channel right down below. It's free and it helps me out a lot, lets me know what people like and dislike on the channel. Best of luck in the deer woods this season as well. Hopefully your bow and arrow system is dialed in and ready to go. Other than that, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.